Hi, I'm Ken Johnson, graduating class of 1970, St. Mary's University, Halifax. This is a brief history, as I can recall it, from my days at St. Mary's. I was invited by Coach Hayes to play ball with his team, and took the train in late August to arrive in Halifax. Grabbed a taxi at the front of the station. As we pulled up in front of St. Mary's, I found it quite interesting to look at the school and see what was basically a replica model of Cathedral High School in Hamilton. Apparently they'd been built by the same bishop with the same stones, and I thought, good God, I've gone back in time. Made me feel more at home, I suppose, and that made it quite comfortable. So I quickly went in, found out where my residence room was, and went up and settled into the fourth floor in the residence at the, I guess it's the north end of the building. So how did it go? Well, in 1966, I arrived for a football camp with Coach Hayes. There was a cross-section of Ontario boys, like Terry Johnson from Toronto, Ed Markowski, Ed Turek, and myself from Hamilton, Ontario, and then the seniors like Paul Puma, Murphy, and Redmond, who were kind of the stalwarts of the team. We had a few days of practice before we had an exhibition game at Maine Maritime Academy outside of Bangor, Borough, Maine. It was really quite amazing. We had a nice bus trip down, and although we lost the game, we couldn't kind of adjust to 11-man field when we were used to playing with 12, and our one corner not being there always seemed to be where they ran the ball and beat us. But it was a fun game. We were competitive, and we stood up well for the school. They held a nice post-game banquet for us, which was very inviting and friendly. And afterwards, we had a bit of a party. It was kind of an education for the Canadian boys. The girls at the school for the game and for the party indicated they were really quite upset that more than 40% of their young males had been drafted and sent to Vietnam, while us Canadians simply stayed out of it and didn't have to respond to things like the draft. It was really an education for us. We really had no understanding of that direct impact on little communities and the male-female mix and the impact of the Vietnamese War. On returning from that game, I examined my priorities kind of as a student and decided to leave football for a more active on-campus life in student politics, drama, and psych. Returning for our homecoming weekend was a little confusing, as most of the Ontario guys were 20, while most of the local gals that came to our dance for homecoming were first-year students from Dow and other gals from across town. Difficulty was that most of them were 16 and 17-year-olds out of grade 11 in Nova Scotia, making us a bit awkward in knowing how to approach the young ladies, as sometimes in Ontario you'd get into some difficulties if you were going with the young ladies under 16. So we tread cautiously. We had several students that received their A1 classification during that first few weeks at school, which was your draft notice from the U.S. indicating that they had been assigned and were to go to boot camp. It was traumatic for them, but they all responded to the call. One lad on the first floor of residence was off to boot camp in Georgia. He was kind of slight, maybe 110 pounds, only about 5'6" tall. One night, 3 months later, just before our Christmas break, Ted arrived back on campus after 3 a.m. It had been a long trip up from Georgia. So 3 a.m. in the morning, nobody awake, all the exterior doors to the school locked. Ted had to figure a way to get in. Nobody seemed to be able to answer. So when his roommate didn't wake up, he took his boot camp training experience and managed to put together and set a bunch of bushes by the dorm door and set them on fire so the fire alarm went off. Of course, this drew in the fire trucks and Father Hennessy. Luckily, Father Hennessy, with his indomitable personality and experience, was able to protect Teddy from the authorities with an incredible tale of trials and tribulations of a young soldier preparing to leave his home for Vietnam in the next week. We could always depend on the hand to provide the best possible support for what he felt were his charges as the Dean of Men. A good example of that was my first day actually registering for school with 3 other friends from Cathedral High School in Hamilton, Tony, John, and Rick Harper. Tony and John were registering. Rick was just accompanying them. He had been at McMaster the previous year and was heading off to a job that he had with the band he played in as a drummer, and they were playing in Vegas, but he was accompanying his brothers for the week before he left. Father Hennessy came out of the office and saw myself sitting with Rick talking. John and Tony were registering. And what did Father say? He said, "Tony, I thought you were coming here." And he said, "Oh, sorry, Father, I know I look a lot like my brother Tony. We both have the red curly hair, but I've had my shot, and I'm going to be playing with a band, and I'm not going to school this year." And Father Hennessy said to him, "Okay, Rick, do you want to go to school?" And Rick said, "What do you mean, Father?" He said, "Do you want to have a shot at going to school? If you do, get in there and register." Rick stood up, went into the office, and registered. Talk about a life-changing experience. Here's Father Hennessy meeting a young man with no particular plans to have anything to do with St. Mary's and offering him the opportunity of a lifetime. Quick history: Rick took that opportunity, did his first year pre-dent at St. Mary's, transferred to the University of Toronto Dental School, and ended up as one of the top oral surgeons in North America for his career, just recently retired. All a result of the style and personality of an individual like Father Hennessy. And it was typical of what St. Mary's provided with the Jesuits in those days. So my residence was at the north end of the main building. I was in room 304, and Father Hoffman was our floor proctor, about 4 rooms down. First few weeks we experienced serious adjustment issues, as virtually every night a student from St. Mary's was accosted somewhere on Atlantic Street, or if they ventured down towards Barrington or Hollis Streets, they'd get hammered with 2x4s, bricks, whatever, just a roving bunch of banditos, I guess. It took 2 months to establish some degree of security if you went off campus, and it seemed to alleviate what was happening with these guys. Both through football and through the ongoing sports season, Sweet's Soda Shop down on Spring Garden Road was the designated haunt for St. Mary's Huskies, providing fabulous support for the teams and special consideration on anything we ordered. The Lord Nelson provided the aging cadre from Ontario with its usual opportunities on Friday nights for shuffleboard tournaments, a few quarts of ale, which was new for the Ontario lads who had only ever seen pints at home. Took a while to adjust so that we didn't quickly lose our orientation, you might say. I won't get into a lot of detail about the time the basketball team got into a tussle with a group of Dalhousie lads at the Lord Nelson. It resulted in the local constabulary gathering them up, marshalling them into a paddy wagon, only to have one of the lads open the back of the paddy wagon before it pulled away, releasing all of his colleagues. Well, of course, this resulted in a major incident where the police arrived at the university to meet with Father Hennessy as the Dean of Men. He spent virtually 5 hours pleading with authorities to save the careers of our overhyped b-ball boys. Again, his turn of phrase and the great respect the community had for him saved the day and the SMU b-ball team. They were assigned very strict responsibilities around campus and restrictions in terms of tending the Lord Nelson for a while. But they didn't get any kind of formal record or problems, which was terrific. Our residence in those days, 66, 67, was about 28% foreign students, mostly Americans from the New England states, particularly Boston and Maine, with a spattering of students from Jesuit high schools all across the East, Midwest, and San Francisco area. Significant representation as well in residence, in particular, from Hong Kong students. We were a close-knit group, had a lot of fun times in the student lounge on the top floor, where bridge, euchre, and poker often went on all night. Father Hennessy, he'd be seen wandering the halls of residence after midnight, often claiming he couldn't sleep, worrying about our well-being, and every once in a while breaking up a late-night euchre game in one of the students' rooms, saying, "Hey, you got classes tomorrow, guys. Come on, get with the program." The school was run by the Jesuits, and in my first year, although we were considered co-educational, we had 950 males and 1 female student full-time. The second year, Pierre Trudeau's government expanded universities across the country, and suddenly we were a real co-ed campus, with 40 additional female students and overall approaching 2,000 students. After a brief confrontation over time between the Jesuits and the Archbishop of Halifax, SMU Senate moved to be full co-ed. The bishop did not want St. Mary's to go full co-ed because of the potential impact on Mount St. Vincent University enrollment, which was all female and Catholic at the time. Our student council president that first year was Leonard Rambo, a very dynamic, involved young man. He provided kind of a model for student leadership as we moved into a highly charged period of student activism. Leonard was also the first manager of the first Canada Manpower office for students on campus in 1968. On graduation, he took his business degree and through his dynamic personality became the lifelong manager of Anne Murray, leading her into a successful singing career as Canada's Snowbird. Another example of the influence St. Mary's students had as they approached their careers after graduation. One of the requirements for first-year students that were Catholic at St. Mary's was to take 2 years of Catholic theology, which in the 60s, under the Jesuits, was a comprehensive study of the documents of Vatican II under Pope John the 23rd. It was kind of a perfect marriage of the movement in the Church to an ecumenical opportunity for all Christian traditions to consider developing strategies for a closer relationship across the world. The Jesuits were passionate in communicating the ecumenical movement outlined in Vatican II discussions. Women's role in the Church and community was to be challenged as it existed. This provided pretty strong motivation to students as we moved to seek greater opportunities for interaction and dialogue with women overall, which we felt were relatively rare in year one with virtually an all-male campus. It fit perfectly with the academic and theological bent of the Jesuits in the upheaval of the 60s. In some ways, the theological shift in the Church to modernize was a real catalyst to encourage student involvement in the decisions affecting our future. The academic agenda at St. Mary's provided fine small classes with great dialogue between the students and professors. I was in art psychology, and the department was led by Dr. Jerry Gordon, at that time relatively young, from the University of London in England. He was younger than 2 of our married students in the class. Chuck Hayes was a professor in learning, full-bearded specialist, and also did sensation and perception, while Ermengarde Lenzer was a key researcher in physiological psych. In philosophy, we had Father Lonergan, who for his work on insight received global recognition as the philosopher of the 20th century. Along with Father Bert Gaffney's recognition in astronomy, St. Mary's had a quality, well-appointed, and involved faculty to challenge all of us as students. Classes that occurred at night were the sole opportunity for a male-female dialogue, as from the community we had professional teachers, nurses, and social workers who were women who came as part-time students pursuing advanced credentials, and they represented about 50% of those nighttime classes. As resident students, we got the first shot at working the language lab in French and the various opportunities for setting up theaters, gym for special activities, and providing us guys and residents with a great source of pocket cash to keep us solvent throughout the year. Second year, 67-68. Now we see the expansion beginning with the approval of 5 new buildings and a new football stadium. We had the 18-story residence with a series of 4-story residences connecting to what would become the Married Students Tower. On alternate floors of the main residence, it was to be male and female students, which created an incredible shift in the on-campus life. The tallest structure had the Father Burt Gaffney Observatory on its roof. There was a new biology building, a library, a beautiful new 4-story student center. I said, wow, what a great transition. And it seemed to occur in a blink of an eyelash. Now we felt like a big-time university that could compete with anyone. It didn't deter the student body from experiencing an ongoing series of disagreements with the administration, however, that led to demonstrations such as shutting down the cafeteria because the food contractor wasn't meeting the menu. Other demonstrations on Senate representation for students, as the administration was clinging to a traditional paternalistic view of student involvement. This led to many direct conflicts as we worked to get student representation on the Senate and University Board of Directors. We had the usual confrontation and shutdown over the potential non-renewal of a political science professor who was one of the most popular profs on campus. We did get a commitment for his reinstatement from Father LaBelle after much negotiation. Mark Lalonde came to the campus. He was a minister under the Trudeau government. He arrived on campus for the formal opening of the football stadium. We hosted him with the administration, the Students' Representative Council, and Phi Kappa Theta Fraternity at the Oaks residence, former Stanfield home, which had been donated to the university, to meet university and city representatives. It was a great celebration and a recognition of, in a sense, St. Mary's coming to age as a well-rounded university in the Halifax community. On the social front for myself, people like Redman and Jim Dara, who are senior students, were working hard behind the scenes to bring a Greek letter fraternity called Phi Kappa Theta to St. Mary's. It was the only Catholic Greek letter fraternity in North America and boasted the membership of people like John F. Kennedy. Father Favret, their kind of theological supporter backgrounder, and Mr. Ed Kirshner, the fraternity's international director, met with Father LaBelle, president of St. Mary's, and members of the University Board and Senate. They won over the administration, and our charter for Nova Scotia Sigma Mu chapter was granted in 1967. We were sponsored by a Canadian chapter from Concordia University. The administration at that time had just received the Oaks, the family residence of the Stanfield family, stately residence at the end of Roby Street. Adjoined the campus, it was offered to Phi Kappa Theta as their fraternity home for the first 3 years of our existence, as the school had not put together any plans for the use of the facility for other university functions, as is the case today. I was a member of the first pledge class and enjoyed the experience immensely, and then joined the executive as the pledge chair to expand our presence and impact at St. Mary's in the community. Fraternity had a strong kind of community orientation with a Catholic theological spin, service orientation from a Christian perspective. Our membership was made up of a broad cross-section of students involved in campus life, from sports, academics, social justice, and drama groups. Sports was always at the center of a Santa Marian's life on campus. Coach Hayes with the football club always fielded a competitive team, while Coach Goodwin seemed to be able to bring in great players for basketball from New Jersey and Ontario. Kids like Al Brown, 6'8", from New Jersey, his colleague Clem, Joe O'Reilly, also from New Jersey, and then Dennis Reardon from Hamilton Cathedral. Dennis went on to play for the Canadian national team as well. In hockey, we had a fast, competitive group every year I was there. Sports seemed to provide students with great pride and the community with a well-appreciated entertainment focus. All the games were always sold out. Our fights with St. X and Dow were legend. We always seemed to be able to resolve our demonstrations and shutdowns to accommodate the important games. It was simply a very integral part of our student life. Third year, 1968-69, politics was hot and heavy in the 60s. Organizations like the Americans for Students for a Democratic Society, it's kind of based on students' councils across the United States. St. Mary's Student Representative Council was actively involved in the student power movement in North America. We were one of the first councils to pass a motion to provide funding for the defense fund of the Sir George Williams students in Quebec after their computer center takeover and shutdown. We co-sponsored with other East Coast universities and the SDS a freighter from St. John, New Brunswick, which took 600 students, male and female, from across North America to Cuba to assist with the sugarcane harvest. We brought in speakers from student activism from the SDS, the IRA, and Father Berrigan, a Jesuit activist in the 60s from the United States. He was a renowned Catholic activist priest who had just, in fact, before arriving at our campus, married a Catholic nun, certainly emphasizing the non-traditional approach. One of the biggest endeavors that our Students' Council brought to Halifax in partnership with Dalhousie University, the City of Halifax, and Mount St. Vincent was called Encounter Halifax. The keynote speaker in several workshops throughout the week was Saul Alinsky, the guru of nonviolent protest. He was from Chicago. I could say every seminar, workshop, and communication opportunity that he held was enthusiastically supported across the entire community. I found the participation overall was really unsurpassed. He generated excitement. The encounters with Mr. Alinsky and the Student Center provided a strong motivation for constructive but committed strategies for student involvement. It was a rich, unparalleled opportunity for students to learn from a master. Winter carnivals were always fabulous. We had ice sculpting competitions which made the campus look like Quebec during Winter Carnival with Bonhomme. The big winning sculpture that I remember the best, and there were many intricate models around campus, was a skidoo driven by a husky and built by, of course, my Phi Kappa Theta fraternity. The skidoo was 30 feet long and about 10 feet high to the top of the husky's head. The 3 days of building were supported by the fraternities' women's auxiliary, made up of girlfriends and wives working alongside and bringing in the food we needed to keep us going. All societies, from arts, science, engineering, through various social clubs, enthusiastically built their sculptures. It was a pleasure just to travel around campus and take pictures of the creative work that had been done. For our music and headliner entertainment, we brought in acts like Wicked Wilson Pickett, Neil Diamond. Neil actually flew in for our carnival the day after he split the #1 recording artist at the Grammys with Frank Sinatra. I can tell you at the pre-show cocktail party, Mr. Diamond was not pleased that his name did not appear on the theater's main display. He managed to get over it, however, and put on a fabulous show, in spite of what he felt was a slight. St. Mary's, under the direction of Father Stewart, had an incredibly well-respected drama club. The plays, like Hamlet, when they were produced, received full sellouts for every performance, as both students and community at large had great respect for Father Stewart's ability to get the maximum from his young thespians. Richard Minicello, we called him Minnie as a nickname, was Father Stewart's talented lead man during those years. He was from New York City and had the style and love for acting that provided us younger actors with a strong example of what good acting could be. 50% of the actors came from our new women's ranks, a spattering from Mount St. Vincent, and they provided a perfect complement for Father Stewart's directing skills. The Drama Society developed and presented focused workshops and plays throughout the years and provided a great experience for all the participants and the larger Halifax community, which filled our opportunity for every performance. And it also provided an awareness and sensitivity because of the interaction between male and female that carried on literally from September to April. By my final year, as I said in the beginning, most of the guys from Ontario spent their first year in residence. But to give you a bit of perspective of how that spread out across Halifax, by the second year, most of us became day hoppers. 4 of us from Hamilton actually landed a plum placement with Dr. Francis Dunsworth and his family of 10 children in their home on Yonge Avenue. Dr. D was head of psychiatry at Dalhousie and the BGH. The family quickly treated us as their family, which provided an incredibly supportive home and learning environment for 4 20-year-olds from Hamilton. First time away from home. It was a solid home with regular meals and assistance when you got ill. And God knows I, of course, developed the swine flu that year. Dr. D had his family provide better medical care than I could ever have had at a hospital, nursing me through 10 days of a vicious flu virus. But back to health. It was a problem to move my eyes, never mind eat anything. The 2 years with the Dunsworths provided me a fine example of how well supported St. Mary's and its students were by the community at large in the 60s. They would include us in their weekend jaunts to their family camp up at Southwest Cove by Hubbard's, and ultimately developed into lifelong friendships with all the kids. Their one son, Edward, with his wife, completed law at Dalhousie University, and with his wife, just 15 years ago, left their law practice to establish work with a mission school in Nicaragua for the poor. His older brother, John Dunsworth, you might know as the gentleman who plays the cop, Mr. Leahy, on the Trailer Park Boys. They were simply a great family, representative of the Halifax area, and really supportive of St. Mary's, in spite of their affiliation with Dal. As things flowed during those years, one blurring into the next, we all had a great sense of relevance and involvement in our education. Mike Devertai from Trinidad was our SRC president during the turbulent student struggles of my last year. There were the regular visits by the RCMP to each of us on the SRC, which seemed to be the protocol of policing in the student activism days of those times. I was the arts representative in council and had one particularly interesting visit. I'd married my high school sweetheart going into my last year at St. Mary's. We were in an apartment in Spryfield. Towards the last week before graduation, an RCMP constable visited our apartment on the premise of following up on a small Yashica camera that I had purchased early in the year. He claimed I didn't bring it in legally and it was a spy cam. I found that interesting because at customs I had to complete 6 forms. They kept 5 and I had 1. Luckily, I had kept that 1 copy. By this stage, my wife Joanne is a little upset about what's going on and wondering, what have I been doing? I was able to produce the copy, show it to the officer that it had been legally purchased and imported, not used for any nefarious purposes. He bought what I said, because I think obviously he had the original papers, and dropped the questions about the camera immediately. However, what does he do next? But he approaches me requesting that maybe I could provide information or covertly observe one of our biology professors. Well, being a fairly strongly committed social activist at the time, I let him know where I stood on that. He quickly left our apartment and not to be heard from again, I think. Although I often wondered how my file looked when I originally applied for security clearance for a federal job with Canada Manpower in '78. Obviously I passed it and I became a counselor with the Canada Manpower Service at that time. But it was something that was always at the back of my mind. The 60s were an incredibly rich, challenging, and fulfilling experience for Santa Marians. We went from 900 students in 1967 to almost 4,500 in 1970. A good representation of women on campus now. We confronted the Jesuits during those time frames on issues around the Senate, administration, overall, what the priorities were that we felt need to be addressed around campus. We found in those dialogues, as potentially negative as they could be, there was always a mutual respect, and key players like Father Hennessy, Father O'Donnell, Father Stewart, Father LaBelle, with the changing theology of Father Hoffman and Father Kieran's, provided the richest possible university for all of us. My graduating year psych class had only 6 seniors, 3 guys, 3 girls. Interesting dichotomy, which ended up by involving us all in extensive physiological and learning psych research at what would be a grad level at Dalhousie University. We were able to do research implanting electrodes for brain studies of the limbic system and emotional pathways, and we were doing complete histologies, mapping neurological pathways throughout the brain for areas that were stimulated and identifying for Dr. Lenzinger exactly what the dynamic was that was happening. It was extremely exciting for us. I guess at this stage, in closing, what I'd say, if you look at students from the 60s, you'll find them in every professional field and endeavor, from major captains of industry to political and professional careers across the world. St. Mary's always challenged us to be the best that we could be and provided the examples to live by every day. Now that's as I remember it, and I wanted to share this initially to give you kind of my insight and recollection to this stage. It may help you decide exactly what you want to do in interviewing me to pursue certain elements, maybe to clarify some things, but overall, the experience that St. Mary's provided gave me a background and confidence to move forward in a career that I felt was very rewarding, ultimately working as a counseling specialist for the federal government, dealing with major adjustment across Canada in particular, and then privately as a consultant to the World Bank in areas like Russia in 92, 93, 94 to set a pilot for their transition to a free market economy, and work with governments in the Caribbean, Mexico, Egypt, Czechoslovakia, the Eastern Bloc, with models that Canada had in employment development and supporting workers in their endeavors to gain full-time employment. Again, overall, what St. Mary's provided for me was a grounding and an approach that was always one based on mutual respect, but confidence in putting forward beliefs that had developed over many years, and an understanding of the responsibilities that went with that. I think the Jesuits were, by serendipity, the perfect conveyors at the time of the transition to challenge the status quo and show what a successful model of that transition could be. Hope this helps you in your effort to establish that archive of audio images on St. Mary's. I can only say that for me it was absolutely the most formative and influential experience in my lifetime, and provided what would become the basis for my successful career and a very enjoyable, fruitful life with my family and community. Thanks.